Hi, my name's Steve and welcome to the Seaside Allotment channel. And today I'm doing a quick review of the Polytunnel project that is nearing completion. And this isn't a tour of the Polytunnel or anything like that. It's just a review of the design, the construction process and things that we've already done to change the design or little add-ons that we've done, things like that. I promised this review a few days ago when I did my sort of quick overview of the tunnel build process. So let's go on and have a look around. So I thought I'd initially just talk about what inspired me to get this polytunnel, and I stuck a picture up in this video, which you've probably just seen, of the polytunnel at the Edinburgh Botanical Gardens, Royal Horticultural Gardens, something like that. And it had these amazing big double doors at both ends of the tunnel, and I just really loved that idea. It gave the polytunnel such a sense of space. You could walk through it, which made it really practical. And of course, there was great ventilation. You know, the air quality in the tunnel was amazing, and I just really liked that idea. So I've duplicated that design, and in some ways that design kind of dictated which tunnel I bought. So the next thing I thought I'd do is just talk about the things that I invested in. So as just mentioned, I invested in double sliding doors, which seemed the most practical and flexible solution. And double doors at both ends of the tunnel, and that wasn't a huge investment, and I'm really pleased anyway that I made that. I think it was about £120 for that option, so I was really pleased about that. I also invested in these little trestle table supports, and they looked really rubbish to start off with. You know, they weren't very rigid. But as it happens, once the trestles at the tabletops are on, and the legs are supported with these little D-clips that I bought, they're actually really good, incredibly rigid and strong. And so I'm really pleased with those, and they were really cheap. It's like 50 quid or something like that for all of them. So I was really pleased with those. So what else did I decide? Oh yeah. We're on a very windy site here, close to the sea. You know, we're actually about a mile away from the sea, so I went for the thicker tubes, and I also went for these braces. And again, I'm pleased I did, because they weren't that expensive, an upgrade. I mean, all these little things, of course, they all add up eventually, but these are 32 millimeters, I think, instead of 25, and they just feel really rigid by comparison with these little 25 ones, which are on these rails. And I also went for these additional rails, and you know, one of the main reasons I went for them was because you can grow, you can attach string to them and grow stuff up the string, and I want to do a lot of that. So I've got the rails running along on the inside of the polytunnel on both sides, and I also went for these crop bars. And again, you know, the plan is to grow stuff up from these pots up onto here and then across. And I can also put nets in between these crop bars and sort of grow stuff through the nets. So you know, I'm really pleased that I went for those extra options. And again, it's just kind of belt and braces for the wind, but also just much more flexible from a growing perspective. So what else did I go for? Well, I did go for the base rails rather than trenching, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So the most important thing that I probably went for was the size. So I decided to go for 20 foot by 10 foot. And again, I'm pleased with that decision. The polytunnel does have an amazing sense of space, something that's hard to convey in a video, but it just feels really nice when you're in here. It doesn't feel claustrophobic or stuffy or anything like that. It's just, obviously when it's really hot, it's probably going to feel a bit stuffy, but it just feels really lovely. And of course, you can just get so much in. Now, upgrading the size, you know, say doubling the size, doesn't double the cost. In fact, it's you know, maybe only adds a quarter to a third to the cost. So it's definitely worth it if you can afford it. Now, from my perspective, affording it isn't too big of an issue, because we're going to pay this polytunnel investment off in basically the summer season, so June, July and August. So the harvest from June, July and August, the value of those will be about the equivalent of the cost of this polytunnel. So a 3-month return on investment for me is just great, but I don't really think about it in those business terms. It's just, allotmenting is just a zero cost hobby, basically. You know, lots of opportunity to do projects and have fun, with all the costs paid for by what we harvest. So it's really great. And so the final thing we went for the screw anchors. So basically there are several different options for this site. I could have just hammered tubes into the ground, which really wouldn't have been strong enough for a windy site. I could have dug holes and put a plate with a pole attached to it in the hole and then refilled it, or I could have got screw anchors. Now, on the Northern Polytunnels site, it talks about screw anchors and research that they did into them, and they reckon they're twice as strong on the right ground as the buried plates. And so that I found that, you know, quite a compelling case, because this particular area of my plot is effectively undisturbed. It's, you know, and where it has been disturbed, it's been very well trodden over the last 2 years. And certainly when I put the screw anchors in, I'll just bung up a picture of Robin holding one of the screw anchors so you can see what I mean. When I put them in, you could definitely feel, you know, that the ground was difficult to screw into. And as we've been building the polytunnel and pulling on the tubes and all of that sort of thing, which we've done quite a lot of, you know, they've definitely not shown any sign of give. So I've been really pleased with them. They did cause us one problem though, which was that when you put a screw anchor in, there's 2 challenges. One of them is that you know, if you hit any obstruction, it can take the screw sort of slightly out of its allocated position, or its ideal position. And the other problem with them is that, you know, if you hit an immovable object, you're kind of stuck, really. What they say is you've then got to kind of excavate a hole and backfill with concrete, which isn't an option. And I did hit that problem. And so one corner of the polytunnel is 1.5 inches out of true, and I was quite worried about that, but as it happens, you can't even tell. You know, it didn't cause any real construction issues to speak of, so I'm quite happy about that, and I did talk about that in the previous video. So it's definitely something to be aware of. And what I did was I did buy a couple of the foundation plates and tubes, which I think was only about £5 or something like that, so it wasn't very much, just in case I hit an immovable object and had to dig a hole, you know, excavate a hole, because you can't use concrete on this site. So, you know, it was just a fallback, because you don't want to get to a position where you're trying to assemble the thing and then you know, you've got to wait 2 or 3 days for something to be delivered. So, you know, for £5 I thought it was worth it. So the next decision I had to make was, did I go for wood or aluminium everywhere? So wood or aluminium doors, wood or aluminium base rails. You can't really see the base rails, they're kind of stuck behind here. Give you an idea of what they look like. And I went for wood. And why did I go for wood? Well, basically I was looking at two tunnels, the one from Northern Polytunnels and the one from First Polytunnels. The Northern one didn't offer me the double sliding doors at each end, and I really wanted those, so that kind of swung me significantly in favour of First Tunnels. The other thing is, I just like wood as a material. Obviously it rots eventually, but what I really like about it is it's flexible. You can screw things into it, you can repair it, you can hang things from it, you can extend it, you can do all sorts of stuff with wood in a way that's a bit more difficult to do with aluminium. So basically those are the two reasons, the flexibility and the fact that I could get the double doors. Now I also went for base rails rather than trenching, and I'll just try and show you how these base rails work. Basically you attach the polythene to this piece of wood here, and this wood here slides up and down on these poles, and then you put your foot on here, loosen these nuts and bolts off, put your foot on here, stretch the polythene down as much as you can, and then retighten the bolts, and so you get a really good drum tight feel. Now you can see that these are not touching the floor at the moment, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on as to why that is. But the other option is to sink the polythene under the ground in a trench and then backfill the soil. Now in this design that I've gone for, basically the polytunnel is held down by the screw anchors that are in these corners and in the intermediate posts, intermediate posts as well. In a trenched one, really the polytunnel is held down by the polythene that's in the trench. Now Nick from Nick's allotment, he showed how he put new polythene sheet on his trenched polytunnel, and he made the job look really easy by comparison with this job. These base rails, they seem really convenient and quick and easy, and you do get a nice drum tight polythene sheet, but it's a lot of extra expense for the base rails. It's a lot of hammering and a lot of wood to rot, and then when you do come to replace the polythene, it's a lot more work because you've got to take all of these battens off that hold the polythene down. I'll just show you how that works. So basically the polythene comes down here, and then it goes inside there and then out the bottom here, and it's held in place by this nailed batten, and as you can see there's a lot of nails to put in. So and obviously eventually this batten will rot because there's a lot of water that pours down the side of this polytunnel onto these battens, unless I put a gutter in, which I'll talk about later on. So I am not convinced that the base rails are a good idea. Obviously they've got advantages, but they've got costs and actual real disadvantages as well. So I think in hindsight I would have seriously considered trenching. However, on this plot, the particular site I've got here, there probably wasn't enough room to dig trenches, and so in the end I was kind of forced into this decision. But for anybody else considering it, I would seriously consider really look into the pros and cons of trenching versus the wooden or the aluminium base rails. Now if I kind of were to run through the comparison between First Tunnels and Northern Tunnels, which seem to be the two front runners in terms of tunnels in this country, which is the UK, I think Northern Tunnels is the better product in many ways. I think the way that the quality of the construction, the all aluminium frame which isn't going to rot, the twisty wire fixing system, that might be a wrong term, but something like that, wiggle wire attachment system for the polythene, it all seems to be, you know, better designed, easier to adjust, easier to replace in the future, less likely to rot, and all of that sort of thing. But for the reasons I've just gone through, you know, I really wanted the double doors, I really liked the wood, I didn't have enough space for trenching, you know, those sorts of things, you know, all those sorts of things added up. And this tunnel, I think, from First Tunnel is about £200 cheaper than the Northern one, which, you know, over the life of a polytunnel, you're probably going to spend more than £200 replacing all this rotten wood at some point in the future, and you're going to curse the fact that you went for this difficult wooden batten system rather than the wiggle wire when you come to replace the cover. But it is what it is. The decision is made, and I'm happy with it for now. Okay, so there are a few little hints and tips. So everything's held together by these little self-tapping screws, and basically they've got like a little drill bit on the end of them, and you drill in, and then once the drill bit's through, it turns from a drill bit into a screw, self-tapping screw, and they're all over the place, and they can be really tricky to put in, especially, you know, high up here in the ridge, for example. So it's definitely worthwhile getting yourself a few appropriate drill bits and piloting. Now, I broke a few drill bits doing this, so I'd get 2 or 3 and pilot drill before you put them in. It makes life one heck of a lot easier. And even if you only pilot drill the outer tube rather than the inner tube, then that provides a really good guide for the self-tapping screw to go in. So I definitely recommend doing that. I'd also recommend pre-nailing all the battens that you're going to use to fasten everything together, because when it comes to be the day when you fit all of this stuff, all the polythene, having all these battens nailed just makes the job so much quicker, because it's quite a long job doing all this in a day. I think it took us about 4 or 5 hours, and that would have been probably more like 8 hours if we hadn't have pre-battened everything. So I would definitely do that. And then there are some places like here where putting these self-tapping screws in is quite awkward once you've got everything assembled, and so I pre-drilled all those, and that again made everything really easy. So what next? So I've made a few modifications to the door. So First Tunnels just provide polythene doors, 100% polythene covered doors in the double door models, and I wanted mesh panels. I don't know whether you can see these green mesh panels, and so I put mesh in, which is fine, and that's worked really well, but obviously that's a lot of ventilation in summer, but it's not a lot, it's too much ventilation in winter. So I've also just got some acrylic panels. Debbie actually put these little beads in the door, so we left a 6 or 7 millimeter gap here, and then there's an acrylic panel which is going to fit in here, and then there's these little twisties which are just going to twist and fasten the acrylic panel in place, and that should provide a nice windproof, weatherproof cover that we can put over in the worst of winter. And these doors, there's quite a few air gaps in them, so even with those panels on, there's quite a lot of air going to come through here, down the sides of the doors here, underneath the doors here. So I think there's still going to be plenty of ventilation. And you know, it is possible to tighten that up if we wanted to as well. So what else, other changes did we make? Well, let me just close the door. Okay, so I put little latches on the doors. They just pull the doors tight, and it's a lot more convenient to open all these little latches than it is to constantly be opening these. What I also did was put these paving slabs in at the doors and drilled holes in for these latches, which means I can latch in any position that I want wherever I've drilled a hole. So in one of the doors I've basically latched it so that you can leave it open just a crack like that, or you can sort of half open it, or you can fully open it like that. Now I actually was not particularly happy with the fact that these nail plates on the back of the door catch on, I don't know if you can see, they catch on this, no you can't see, on that batten, and so I've set my maximum door opening to prevent that catching. It just annoyed me all the time whenever I open the doors fully, so the doors don't actually open fully. It's just it's about 3 inches before they hit the stops. That just stopped me getting annoyed by the constant catching. So what other changes did I make? So I spoke to one of the fitters, and he said rather than leaving these 7 centimetres off the ground, it's actually a good idea to raise them 9 centimetres off the ground, fit the polythene to them, stretch it down, and leave just an inch at the bottom, and then leave a skirt on the polythene, which I'll show you in a minute, and fasten that skirt down so that it's fully sealed. So there's a few benefits to that. One is that extra inch allows you to tension the polytunnel in the future if you want to, you know, if the polythene stretches over the years. But it also means that the wood never touches the ground, and so there's less chance of it rotting. Now in my case, as you can see, probably that is more than an inch. That's about 2.5 inches. And the reason for that is because we fitted the tunnel in March, and so in the height of summer we're going to stretch the tunnel a bit more and take it down an extra inch, and it's just not possible to stretch it that much on quite a sunny day, but a sunny day in March is not the same as a sunny day in June. And so I've left enough space here to get my foot in so we can do that stretching. Now we're also leaving, rather than cutting the polythene off, at the bottom here, and you can see with my finger, at the bottom there, we're leaving a skirt, and we're tucking that skirt in underneath the landscape fabric, and we're going to do the same down here. And that means that we've basically got that skirt sealing the polytunnel against any unwanted visitors, and it also means we can leave the base rail this inch off without getting any drafts or anything like that. So back to my notes, see if I can think of anything else. So you have to put this anti-hotspot tape, which you can just see here, on the main tubes, and First Tunnels provide enough to do that, and in fact just enough to put an extra bit on the, so you need it on this side, but you also need it on that side, and there isn't, by design, you know, the instructions say just to put it on that side, but that's not enough. And so I was pleased that I had enough extra to put it on here, because definitely the polythene is definitely touching on this side and on that side. So they don't really provide enough, because it's also touching here, and there was not enough polytunnel repair tape to get it in there. So I have bought some extra, which I'm going to fit in a minute. They also don't provide any to go on the ridge, and yet it's also touching on the ridge, so I'm going to put some on the ridge. So basically it's just worth getting yourself a couple of extra rolls, I think, of the hotspot tape, so you can actually put it on all the pipes where it's touching. We've also put it at the end of the trestles here, at which point I'll also just show you what I did with the trestles. So I've attached this piece of wood, which is just 6x1 treated timber, to the aluminium trestle support, and that means I can then rest two separate trestle tables, basically, so each 5-foot stretch is a separate trestle table. And I just made these from tile battens. Slate battens are probably not strong enough, but the tile battens seem to be really good, and that means I can just easily take the tables off, and you know, have any combination of tables or not tables that I want, so it's really flexible. What I also did was I got these little D clips off eBay, about, you know, £2 or something off eBay, and they just work fantastically for attaching these trestle table legs to the raised beds. And so it's another thing, just order those 2 or 3 weeks before you do your polytunnel build, because it takes that long for them to arrive, and order quite a few because they're so cheap. I also use them at the end here to attach that trestle table leg, and it really does help with the rigidity of the whole thing. It's just a really neat way to do it, so I was really pleased with that. Okay, we're nearly done in this mammoth video. So these are just a few extra ideas that I've got. So the first one is that when it's really cold, a lot of wind and a lot of air is going to escape through these doors. So I'm thinking of getting some bubble wrap, which I noticed I can get really cheaply from my local garden centre, and basically making a bubble wrap blanket which will hang on here and be fastened to the door frame, and it's probably something as easy as just some little drawing pins or something like that, and it'll take 2 minutes to put it up, and that would probably be only if we have a kind of return of the beast from the east kind of situation, which will only need to be put up at one end of the polytunnel, and it'll probably be that end. And yeah, I think that'll make a really big difference. The other thing is I'm thinking of putting a mylar blanket in between each of these poles on the north side of the polytunnel, just to reflect heat and light to these beds, which are obviously going to be absolutely chock full of stuff in winter. And I'm also going to be collecting water from the polytunnel, and this is a bit of an experiment here, so you'll see how it goes in a future video probably. But we've got some full-size guttering. We're going to put stakes in on the outside of the polytunnel. We're going to put the guttering, so the guttering kind of is around here, and we're going to attach a kind of little bit of this polythene that we had offcuts from the polytunnel build, and I'll show you how we're going to attach that in a future video. So the water just runs off the polytunnel into the gutter, along the gutter and into storage, water storage area here. And I might, and I probably will, put a little bilge pump fastened to that fence there, so I can just pump the water out of the collection tank into any of my 3 big storage tanks. So I think I've mentioned already that I'm thinking of putting nets up in between these crop bars so I can grow cucumbers and other kind of space hogs up in the roof. Anyway, so that I think is a quick overview, quick review really of the polytunnel and the design decisions that I took and the changes that I've already made. And I will do a tour of the internal design and, you know, my thinking around all these buckets and beds and trellis tables and all that sort of thing. I'll do all that in a future video. So for now, see you soon.